Welcome to the debate. Pistis Sophia is not a text that modern churches fear. It is, it's a text that raises a much harder, honestly more fascinating question. Why did it remain outside the canon?
Exactly. And, just the physical journey of that book is incredible. I mean, picture it, late 4th century in Egypt. A group of monks they're terrified, hurriedly wrapping this massive 300-page manuscript in leather.
Right, burying it deep in the sand to hide it.
Yeah, to hide it from the empire's soldiers. And then it just sits there for centuries, until 1773, when a doctor named A. Askew buys this Coptic manuscript in Egypt, which, by the way, is why it's called the Askew Codex.
Which is a great name for an ancient text, honestly.
It really is. So it ends up in the British Museum, and it just sits there, completely untranslated, for nearly 80 years.
Which is wild to think about.
Right, and when scholars finally cracked it open in 1851, they didn't find a standard gospel. They found this incredible Gnostic revelatory dialogue featuring Jesus' teaching for more than a decade after the resurrection.
Yeah, which forces us to really look at the boundaries of ancient Christianity. What was left out and why. I'll lay my cards on the table right off the bat. My position is that Pistis Sophia remained outside the canon not because of some, minor theological disagreement. It was excluded because its core function rendered the emerging Orthodox Church entirely obsolete.
That's a bold claim, though. Obsolete how?
Well, the text isn't just a story. It's an unmediated, do-it-yourself manual for direct consciousness liberation. If you have this text, you frankly don't need the institutional architecture of bishops, priests, or sacraments. It was a practical structural threat to institutional authority.
Okay, and I take a very different view of that early Christian history. I absolutely agree that text is historically fascinating. It is a true masterpiece of Coptic literature. But we have to be incredibly careful here. We can't let the phrase outside the canon get sensationalized into, a forbidden truth or a suppressed true gospel.
But it was suppressed.
Well, it remained outside the canon because its highly complex, esoteric cosmology represents a fundamentally different religious universe. The exclusion wasn't driven by some fearful suppression of a structural threat. It was about theological coherence.
Theological coherence?
Yes. It vividly illustrates the diverse, highly localized alternative traditions of late antiquity, sure, but it simply did not speak the same language as the texts that formed the core of Christian worship.
Okay, well, before we dive into the clash over authority, I think we need to establish what this text actually is and the language it uses. Because if I'm listening to this and I'm only familiar with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Pistis Sophia sounds like it's from a completely different planet.
Oh, it really does.
You mentioned its esoteric cosmology. We're going to be throwing around terms like the demiurge, archons, and aeons. Can you break down this universe for us? What are we actually looking at here?
I can definitely do that. And you're right, it is a totally different framework. Think of it like this. Canonical Christianity, drawing on its Jewish roots, says a loving, all-powerful God created a good physical world.
Right. And God saw that it was good.
Exactly. The Gnostic cosmology of the Pistis Sophia flips that entirely. It posits that the material universe is a cosmic mistake. It was built by an ignorant, false creator called the demiurge.
An arrogant builder who, thinks he's the only God.
Precisely. The demiurge looked around at the void, didn't realize he was just a diminished echo of the true, hidden divine source, and basically declared himself the highest God. He creates the physical world essentially as a trap, a prison for divine sparks of light.
Wow.
Yeah. The archons are basically the prison guards. They're these forces of ignorance and chaos that keep human consciousness trapped in matter. And the aeons are the rungs on the cosmic ladder, the layers of reality that stretch from our material prison all the way up to the ultimate hidden God.
So into this cosmic prison falls our title character, Sophia.
Right. Sophia, which means wisdom, is this divine feminine figure who falls from the higher realms down into the chaos of the material world. The bulk of the text is really her journey back up, Jesus is teaching the disciples about her 13 repentances, or ascents, through these different cosmic levels.
And this is where the text's danger to the institution becomes so clear to me. When we hear the word repentance, we immediately think of moral guilt, right? Apologizing to a deity for doing something wrong.
Sure, the standard canonical view.
But when scholars translated this codex, they realized that the Greek word used here, metanoia, doesn't mean moral guilt in this context. It literally means a change of mind, a progressive transformation of consciousness.
It is a profound psychological map. Yes, I'll give you that.
But it's more than a map. I'd argue it's a technology. Let's look at the actual mechanism in the text. Sophia is at the bottom of the chaos, surrounded by these terrifying, lion-faced emanations of the demiurge. And she cries out, recognizing that the evil thoughts entering her are not her own.
Right, she realizes she's being influenced.
Exactly. The Greek phrase used is dialogismoi poneroi, which means divisive reasonings or separative thought patterns. She realizes these aren't native to her consciousness at all. They are broadcast from the archons. The prison guards are basically hacking her mind.
That is a really brilliant way to describe the Gnostic concept of material distraction. Yeah.
Right, so she isn't confessing a moral failure to a priest. She's identifying a cognitive structure installed by a system of control. And when she recognizes this, the grip of the chaos loosens. This is what I mean by a technology of spoken invocation. It is operational.
Operational in what sense?
In the sense that any practitioner reading this codex can speak these invocations, recognize the mental hacking, and initiate their own liberation.
Okay, I see the mechanics you're highlighting, but to leap from that psychological framework to a grand theory of institutional suppression, that's where we diverge. You are looking at a brilliant esoteric text and assuming the bishops at the Council of Nicaea were sitting in a room terrified that people would realize they didn't need the church.
Well, I mean, didn't they?
No, because the reality of ancient boundary drawing was far more organic than that. You are suggesting the church was this fragile monopoly trying to crush its competitors. But let's use an analogy. Let's look at the biblical canon as a library door.
Okay, a library door. Go on.
The texts that made it inside the library, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they were adopted because they were being read universally across the Mediterranean. They formed a shared, highly accessible narrative.
Accessible being the key word there.
Right. Pistis Sophia, with its precise mappings of 12 aeons, 7 planetary spheres, and specific archonic entities, it requires a massive baseline of Hellenistic, astrological, and cosmological knowledge.
It's definitely dense.
Extremely. It was highly localized. It was left outside the library door not because it was a threat, but because if you read it alongside the Gospel of Luke, they do not belong to the same theological universe.
I hear you, but the library door analogy makes it sound so passive, like a gentle sorting process by a benevolent librarian. Let me offer a different analogy that gets to the mechanism of what was actually happening.
All right, let's hear it.
Imagine the early Orthodox Church is building a walled garden. The bishops are the single, heavily guarded gate. They determine who gets in and how you interact with the divine, specifically through their approved sacraments. Pistis Sophia isn't just another book in the library. It's a rope thrown over the garden wall that anyone could climb if they knew the right knots. And the church actively burned the ropes.
Well, the rope analogy only works if you fundamentally believe the garden is a prison.
Which the Gnostics did.
Yes, but canonical Christianity didn't view the church or the physical world as a prison. It viewed it as a garden planted by God. But let's run with your idea of structural authority for a second. How does the text actually challenge the bishops?
By elevating the one person the patriarchal bishops couldn't control, Mary Magdalene. Let's look at her structural role in the text. In this post-resurrection dialogue, she is not a peripheral figure, and she certainly isn't the penitent sinner that later traditions made her out to be. She is the undisputed star student.
Oh, she absolutely is. She totally dominates the dialogue.
She asks the most probing questions. She correctly interprets Sophia's journey when the male disciples are confused. Jesus explicitly validates her, saying her heart is raised to the kingdom of heaven more than all her brethren. And the text doesn't hide the tension this causes. Peter gets furious.
Right, he complains to Jesus.
He literally says, We cannot endure this woman who takes our opportunity from us. Now, look at the historical context there. You have an emerging Orthodox institution consolidating power around male bishops, claiming apostolic succession primarily through Peter.
Right.
Elevating Mary Magdalene disrupted that entire patriarchal architecture. This wasn't just a theological debate over eons. This was a real-world clash reflecting Gnostic communities that favored female spiritual authority and direct knowing versus an Orthodox boys' club.
Wait, so Peter actually complains about her in the text?
Yes, he does. But we have to ask why the author wrote it that way. You are reading this as a journalistic account of a first-century gender war.
It certainly reads like one.
But have you considered that Mary Magdalene is functioning here primarily as a literary and theological device? A literary device that just happens to undermine the exact power structure of the Orthodox Church.
Yes, precisely, because it was an internal community debate. Look, I absolutely acknowledge the profound historical value of seeing Mary elevated. It is a vital counterweight to the centuries of marginalization she faced.
Absolutely.
But in the specialized language of the Pistis Sophia, Mary represents gnosis, direct intuitive knowing. Peter represents pistis, which, ironically given the title, usually translates to faith, specifically Orthodox institutional faith.
Interesting.
The text uses these figures as avatars. It shows a specific, highly localized Gnostic community using Mary to validate their own esoteric traditions over the developing mainstream church.
So you agree they were arguing for their legitimacy against the mainstream church?
Yes, but arguing for legitimacy doesn't mean this text is the suppressed, universal truth of Christianity. It means it was the specialized literature of a splinter group. The mainstream church didn't accept it because it undermined the very foundation of their theology, not just their gender politics.
But that argument for legitimacy was met with complete eradication. Let's return to that physical manuscript buried in the sand.
Okay.
The Askew Codex dates to the late 3rd or early 4th century, though the original Greek composition was likely around 150 CE. Why was it buried? Because around 380 CE, Emperor Theodosius I issued edicts that essentially criminalized Gnostic practices.
Right. State power entering the theological debate.
Exactly. Possession of texts like the Pistis Sophia suddenly carried real physical consequences. The communities that practiced these 13 repentances went underground. Most of their texts were burned by imperial decree.
It was a brutal time.
So the fact that someone carefully wrapped this codex and buried it proves that the institutional church actively eradicated alternative paths to salvation. This wasn't just a librarian quietly sorting books, it was a systematic suppression of a rival technology.
Okay, but how can we study a non-canonical text without turning it into a conspiracy? Yes, it was buried for preservation, very much like the famous Nag Hammadi library discovered in 1945. And yes, the 4th century saw the tragic, brutal use of imperial state power to enforce theological boundaries. I don't deny the persecution. It is a very dark chapter of Christian history.
But you don't think they were targeted because they were a practical threat?
I think they were targeted because the Mediterranean was a massive, chaotic melting pot. You had Greek astrology, Egyptian magic, Jewish theology, and Christian narrative all crashing into each other simultaneously.
A melting pot, sure.
The consolidating church was trying to build a single, sturdy ship out of all that floating debris so the religion could survive it all. They drew strict boundaries. Studying the Pistis Sophia today shouldn't be about claiming orthodoxy was just a power grab. It should be about appreciating how ancient Christians debated the very mechanics of salvation in that melting pot.
Well, if we're talking about the mechanics of salvation, we really have to look at how specific this text gets. It isn't fake philosophy. Look at the 8th repentance. The text identifies the primary weapon of the archonic system as oblivion, the Greek concept of lethe, the active force of forgetting who you truly are.
The spiritual amnesia of the material world.
Right, spiritual amnesia. And Sophia's response to this amnesia isn't silent contemplation. The text uses the Greek word hymneo, meaning to create sacred sound. She speaks aloud. She says, "Let not oblivion seize upon me, O light, for I have sung praises unto thee.
Hmm.
If you're listening to this and wondering how someone actually chants their way out of a cosmic prison, this is it. The Gnostic practitioners understood that the vibrational act of speaking aloud disrupts the field of oblivion. It breaks the broadcast.
That's a fascinating interpretation of the ritual.
And the absolute culmination of this is the 13th repentance, where the entire grammatical structure of the text shifts.
Ah, yes. The shift from petition to praise.
It is staggering when you read it. For 12 repentances, Sophia is calling upward to the light, asking for help. But in the 13th, she is established in the 13th aeon above the archonic spheres, and she says, "Thou hast saved me," past tense.
Past tense.
Not, "Thou wilt save me," or "I hope to be saved when I die." The salvation is recognized as an already accomplished fact.
The realization is the salvation.
Exactly. The recognition that consciousness was never truly separated from the source is the liberation itself. That distinction between salvation as a future event mediated by a priest and salvation as a present recognition activated by the individual is the exact fault line. That is the rope over the wall.
It's a beautiful concept. And honestly, you've articulated the Gnostic appeal perfectly. But let me give you a different perspective on that 13th repentance and why the Church couldn't just adopt it.
Go ahead.
When she reaches the 13th aeon, she isn't fully reabsorbed into the absolute, the hidden God. She remains in a liminal space. She becomes a receiver and transmitter of the light for those still trapped in the lower realms.
Kind of a bodhisattva figure almost.
Very much so. But again, you have to look at the cosmological assumptions beneath the poetry. This entire system fundamentally assumes that matter, the physical body, the earth itself, is an illusion or a trap.
Well, yeah.
In the 9th repentance, she specifically asks to be delivered from the matter of this darkness. In the Gnostic framework, the goal is to realize you are not the body, to escape the reincarnation cycle, the wheel of fate.
Right, because the body is the prison built by the demiurge.
Right. But canonical Christianity views the physical body in the material world as sacred creations. Fallen, perhaps, but inherently good, authored by a loving God. They believe the physical world will ultimately be resurrected and redeemed, not escaped.
Okay.
You cannot put a text that views matter as a dark prison on the same central shelf as the Gospel of John, which famously declares, "The Word became flesh." To accept the Pistis Sophia, you have to sever Christianity from its Jewish roots entirely. You have to declare the physical world a mistake. That, more than any fear of a do-it-yourself salvation manual, is why it was left outside the canon. It's fundamentally incompatible theology.
Hold on, though. You're saying they view matter as a dark prison, but I think the text's understanding of matter is remarkably nuanced, maybe even ahead of its time.
Nuanced how?
The Pistis Sophia doesn't advocate for the hatred of the body. It advocates for correct orientation. It recognizes that identifying as the material form is the trap, not the form itself.
But the demiurge literally built the form to trap the light.
Yes, but when Sophia asks to be delivered from the matter of this darkness, she is withdrawing the misidentification. She is stopping the mistake of thinking her biological interface is ultimate reality. The text is demanding that consciousness recognize its own nature, completely separate from the temporary form it animates.
I mean, that's a very modern psychological reading.
But it's in the text. And it is doing this through the active vocal leadership of Mary Magdalene. You say it's just theology, but theology dictates how people live. If your theology says the material world is a hierarchy ruled by a male god who passes authority to male bishops, well, you get one type of society.
Sure.
If your theology says the physical world is an illusion and true authority belongs to whoever possesses gnosis, regardless of gender, you get a very different society.
And that is exactly what makes the ancient Mediterranean such a fascinating melting pot. I am not trying to diminish the rigor or the beauty of the Gnostic communities. They were incredibly sophisticated.
They were.
But early church fathers like Irenaeus weren't suppressing the Pistis Sophia just to protect their own jobs in some patriarchal boys' club. They were fighting to preserve the continuity of their faith.
The continuity with Judaism, you mean?
Exactly. They believed that God of the Hebrew Bible, who created the world, was the exact same entity as the Father of Jesus Christ.
The Gnostics said, no, the creator of this world is an ignorant monster, and Jesus comes from a higher, hidden God. That is a bridge too far for a religion trying to define its core identity.
I hear the argument for the theological boundaries. I do. But we have to remember that the word heresy originally meant a choice.
A choice, right.
The Pistis Sophia offered people in late antiquity a genuine alternative choice. It offered a complete, practical, direct access methodology to the divine that simply didn't require submitting to an empire-backed religious monopoly. The Askew Codex survived the centuries in the Egyptian sand to show us that the early Christian landscape was vastly more complex, more rigorous, and honestly, more spiritually autonomous than the monolithic narrative we've inherited. Pistis Sophia remains a vital artifact of a lost Christian current that prioritized direct consciousness transformation and elevated the divine feminine. I think it provides a stark, necessary contrast to the institutional hierarchy that ultimately won out.
And I completely agree that it is a masterpiece of Coptic literature that deserves serious historical study. The danger is when we strip it of its ancient context and project our modern anti-institutional biases onto it.
Fair enough.
Its existence outside the canon is a testament to the natural boundary drawing of early Christianity. It is a brilliant, complex, esoteric dialogue that belongs exactly where it is, on the outside shelf of the ancient library. It teaches us immense amounts about the historical diversity of late antiquity, the fascinating way ancient people blended Hellenistic astrology with Christian narrative, and how they debated the mechanics of the soul.
It really does.
And it does all of that without invalidating the canonical texts that form the foundation of Orthodox faith.
Well, I think understanding early Christianity requires looking at both the books that made it inside the library and those left outside in the sand. The door to that library wasn't just closed by passive theological consensus, it was locked by imperial edicts.
We definitely agree it was a messy, often violent process.
But the text remains, the 13 repentances remain. And the question of what those ancient practitioners were actually achieving when they spoke those words to break the archonic broadcasts, I mean, that is something that continues to challenge our understanding of the ancient world.
The library door might be closed, but the books outside still have plenty to say.
They certainly do.